start. Hello, everyone. Please let me know you're listening from home, and I'll tell you about all our plans that we just made before we got you on. But we're in Exodus, and we're still in Exodus 1, which is not a problem. And we just discovered that Pharaoh had this plan to enlist the aid of his citizens, his subjects, to kill Hebrew baby boys and to enslave Hebrew baby girls. So we're kind of at that point where we're saying, how can this be in a holy book? How can this be in Torah? Because it's so horrible. It's tragic. Well, relax, say some commentators, because the events in Exodus didn't really take place the way the texts say they take place, because this is literature, popular literature. It's not scientific, it's not historical reporting of actual events that actually happened. Heck, some of the commentators say, it's not even totally theological. And if Tom were here, he would say, it's stories, you know. Anyone can see that this is embellishment of stories to make it a better story. Very dramatic, very, very good guys and very, very bad guys, almost like a fairy tale. And just look at the text. Did you notice when you were reading Exodus 1 that there are so many Israelite women giving birth that it's almost unnatural, right? The land is swarming, that's the term they use, swarming with Israelites' babies. And yet, in the whole land of Egypt, there's only 2 women delivering these babies. And that doesn't make sense except in fairy tale land, right? Well, some rabbis have a very reasonable response to this. Some of the sages say that Sipra and Puah are not the names of individuals. Rather, they're the names of guilds. Remember, back in the day, groups of people would have join together as members of a particular job, and that's what Sipra and Puah are. They're guilds of midwives, organizations. So there really was a whole battalion of midwives to deliver the Israelite babies. Possible, right? Now, others, commentators say that the midwives were not Sipra and Puah. They were actually Yocheved and Miriam. Yocheved is Moses' mother and Miriam's mother. And Miriam, of course, is Moses' sister. And that these deliveries really are miraculous. But then others say, no way, there weren't even Hebrew midwives. They were Egyptian health professionals. So the text is unclear, but who do you think they were? Who do you think Sipra and Puah were? And maybe just examples, maybe just symbols. Or if you ever thought about it. You know, how could there be so many thousands and thousands of swarming Israelite births with only 2 women to deliver them?
Well, that was my first thought last week when I read that there are only 2 women who were midwives. So it makes sense to me that it could be a guild.
Mm-hmm. Could be a guild, or it just could be a made-up story. And we're going to talk more about these 2 because they have been spoken about over the years. And a birthing stool. Is that a piece of furniture that is actually familiar to you?
I've heard of that.
I've heard of it, but has anybody ever seen it? The text here in Hebrew, the word birthing stool, translates as double stones. When the Hebrew women give birth on the double stones, that's what the text actually says, instead of birthing stools. So what do you think double stones could be? And lots and lots of ink spilled on that one. But the scholarly consensus seems to be that the stool or the stones are both sort of ancient gynecological obstetrician kind of appliances, right? giving birth sat, squatted, or kneeled to deliver the baby. And it's interesting because the passages in the Bible about women giving birth are all written by
Yeah.
men who probably never even saw a birth because it was unsightly, it wasn't considered. Men weren't allowed in, they were allowed to boil water and that was it. But still, it does seem reasonable to assume that the women kneeled or squatted with the help of a stool or a stone to sit on or to hold on to while they gave birth. But the point is they were not lying on their backs the way women today did. You probably did, right?
I had section, I have no idea what I did.
Oh, well, you were on your back then, for sure, but the reason women give, in this country, give in hospitals, now if you have a midwife, chances are you're not gonna be laying on your back. You'll be what's comfortable for you. But lying on one's back makes it easier for the doctor to attend to the birth, but not for the woman. And
That makes
just so you
sense.
know, most gynecologists, obstetricians in this country are men.
Probably, that's changing
Nope,
now.
it's
I
changing.
mean, women
Well,
are
the whole
really-
medical field is changing because men can make more money in pharmaceuticals than they do. And they don't have to touch us women.
Depends on how political they are.
Oh my gosh, if you could listen, that was the field I taught in. I taught Spanish to medical students. They were going right from high school, right to med school, terrifying. And there were quite a few women, young women in the program, and they were Asian Indian, Southern Indian, not Amerindian, and you were like, kind of interesting that women would, and the reason is because it was considered below Indian men of a certain caste to touch women, you just didn't do it. So they're doing quite well for themselves,
I
actually.
would imagine even teaching Spanish, a lot of medical stuff is Latin.
Right,
I mean, if you know Latin, you're golden. You can pronounce your prescriptions even.
right, right, well,
Even if they're 17 syllables long.
I know, you sometimes,
I lived in New Jersey, and most med students in that area were doing internships in that area. Spanish was as essential as being computer literate. That's not true in Venice, but it is true in parts of Florida. You don't have Spanish. You don't communicate with a large section of the population.
Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona too.
Yeah. Oh,
Parts of
absolutely. California. So, what I found interesting is that Shipra and Pua are both liars, right? They both look right at Pharaoh and bald-faced lie to him. But never in Torah are they chastised for lying, for breaking that commandment. And the rabbis don't chastise them either, as they write about them later. In fact, these two women are considered to be right up there, major biblical heroes. They fought the power, they fought Pharaoh. They were only servants, but they stood up to evil. And they actually get rewarded in the text. But do you know how they were rewarded?
with houses?
Names. Names. These two are named. Here's two women who are named in the Bible. And as we all know, that's a big deal in the Bible for a woman to be named. Only, in the whole Bible, only 15% of all the characters are women. That's number one. 600 of whom are never named. We never know who they are. And those who are named are usually sex workers, queens, or poor, pitiful, barren women who never had a child. And the women who are named are also named as his wife or somebody's daughter or
Or
somebody's sister, you know, they're not, so getting a name in the Bible is definitely a big deal, especially when you consider Pharaoh is not named. We just know he's the Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph, you know, but he's never named. Now, some midrash, and if you'll remember what midrash is, it's what people talk about the Bible, what the commentaries, the exegesis, the discussions about the Bible, historically, anthropologically, sociologically. What does this actually mean? What does it mean to us now? What did it mean to us then? Well, the midrash was written by early rabbis, but it keeps being written. Some midrash actually says that Israel was led out of bondage as a reward for the bravery of Shiphrah and Puah. That they have true power and they use it for good. And true power is influence that can actually redirect the course of history. They changed the world.
Now, they were Egyptians.
We don't know.
Well, I
Oh.
don't know that that's true though, because it says the midwives feared God. So
They
if
feared, but which God?
Well, it doesn't say gods, it says feared God. So
Yep, but you wonder which one. But which Bible is that?
this is the NIV.
Interesting, and
It says, because the Hebrew women were not as the Egyptian women, for they were lively and delivered, the midwives came unto them. Oh, I see. I was thinking they were describing them.
do you
Midwives.
remember who Norman Vincent Peale was?
Yeah.
The Power of Positive Thinking. When Michael
Right.
first got sick, God, he was 39 years old, diagnosed with terminal cancer. So what do? I went and got a book by Norman Vincent Peale. It said, how can I be positive about anything? And he talked about, in the book, laughter, how it actually makes chemical changes in your body. God, how are we gonna talk jokes, you know? My husband's just diagnosed with terminal cancer. But I remember, you know,
That's what you need.
I
Yeah.
know,
When you're
coming up
diagnosed
with,
cancer.
coming up
You
with
need a
jokes.
joke.
And after his surgery, I remember Michael saying, "Stop, it hurts when I laugh," you know, it's like, thank you. But he also wrote a book called The Bible of Positive Thinking, which I thought was interesting. And he says in that work that these two, Shiphrah and Puah, this is what he says: they're not famous, they're not strong, but they are powerful. Oh, they're not powerful. Rather, they are persistent and inspirational, and that we should all try to be like them. I kind of like that. So when God calls, we should all answer loud and clear what I teach the kids. Haneni, I am with you, Lord, you and I, together. We will fight against evil, and we'll destroy it together, which is another reason to read the Old Testament. It was a big thing that we fought with at Emmanuel when we started this program. Why are we starting with the Old Testament? Why don't we read the good part, the New Testament? Why are we taking this
It's
time?
the foundation of the whole story.
Yep. And Torah teaches that you can only do the things that can't be done because you do it with God, right? And I love that, and we need to remember that. Now, remember, big word. In Hebrew, zachor, and it means remember, and that's a major theme in the book that we just started, Exodus. Remember is actually a religious imperative. It's an order, it's a commandment to the entire people of Israel. Remember, you were a slave in Egypt. Remember that you cried and you suffered. Never forget. We hear that again and again today. Never forget. You know, there's 6 million at Auschwitz and Buchenwald and so on. But
Jesus gives us a commandment to do this in remembrance of me too.
Remember, yes, and I get to that later. Absolutely, but it's probably not the way most of us live our lives, by remembering horrible things that happened to us. Most of us try to forget them and move on and leave all that trauma and that hurt in our past where it belongs, right? Not carry it with us everywhere we go. It's kind of bordering on psychosis in a way, you know? Can't you just let the past be past? But that's not what we hear in Exodus. In Exodus, over and over, you hear the commandment to remember. And the Exodus doesn't go away ever as a past event. Remember William Faulkner, if you remember reading him? Southern Gothic, interesting fellow. But anyway, one of his most famous quotes is, "The past is not dead. It's not even past." And boy, do we realize that as we read the Bible, right? Because that's the Exodus. It can never be past. It must always be part of the present and the future. And there's a lot of commentary, especially modern commentary, as to whether this is psychologically healthy, using trauma and violence memories to form a collective identity. We kind of talked about that in the beginning in terms of Juneteenth, to form a sense of cohesiveness. Should we remember all the terrible things that they did to us, you know, a sort of we-ness versus themness? I'm not sure that we think
What
about that.
happened to forgiveness?
Yeah, exactly. And that whole concept of we had it worse than anyone else ever. And this feeling is incredibly powerful, and it enables and facilitates a true feeling of solidarity.
It's kind of a downer though. I mean, I just move on.
That's
Yeah, well,
What can you
just,
do?
well, I mean, I don't know if any of you watched Ted Lasso, TV show.
No, I never even heard of it. Tell us.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, it's a great show. It's no longer airing. Only had 3 episodes, but
It was on Hulu or Netflix or something, right?
it's on Apple TV.
Oh, Apple.
But
Apple.
anyways, he was a soccer coach that been brought over from America to England to coach his team. Everyone thought he would fail, and it has a lot of really good messages in there. Believe and all that kind of stuff. Really great messages. But one of the big messages in there at the beginning of the first season is that he tells all of his players that the goldfish is the animal on the earth that has the shortest memory, and he wants everyone to be a goldfish so that every time they lose or anything bad happens to them, just be a goldfish, forget about it, move on.
Come on.
That's my philosophy.
Right, that's why I brought it up, you just said that.
You know, my father died when I was 11, and everyone says, "Oh, that must have been." It wasn't fun, but you know, it's funny. My mother died when I was 33. I can't even remember a funeral. I can remember my father's, but you know, you move on. Fortunately, it didn't change my life much. Had it changed my life, and my mother was destitute, and so
Right.
it would have been a different story. But
You were blessed.
I don't know. People have a tendency to feel sorry for people.
Well,
I'm not sure that's a good thing.
And even for themselves, yeah, and you see that shared behavior that comes out of conflict creates a common bond that is shared by those who have experienced suffering. And we were talking about it in terms of being ancestors of slaves. You know, you share that feeling of slavery, or being poor, or being the wrong religion, or being,
Well, I
you know.
don't understand that. Now, if, say your father was a murderer, that doesn't make you have a tendency to murder.
It's
I
the
mean,
hope.
if he's a slave, that doesn't mean that you're gonna go back to slavery. I mean, I don't understand.
No,
it.
but
Why?
listening to, we joke about those stories. When I was a kid, I walked 3 miles, blah, blah, blah.
Uphill both ways.
Yeah, but
Through the
you
snow
know,
without any shoes.
Oh, well,
memorializing trauma, and we have done that. Every civilization has done that. We put up statues to remind us of the bad things that happen and to memorialize them, that
Really?
violence.
Who does that?
But then we tear them down if they don't fit.
Well, you know, and
Our-
they'll tell you that if you don't remember the past, you're doomed to
repeat it.
Right.
Well, that's true. I
So
mean,
you gotta
I can
remember, you
understand
know.
it being in the back of your head somewhere.
You know
But
what,
at the
what
same
mistakes
time,
not to make, you know.
I can't, it sounds like the Bible's trying to dwell on the past.
We're like us celebrating July 4th. Do you think memorializing our freedom, that war that we fought, or D-Day,
really
or,
good.
collectively, the veterans of foreign wars, they get together at bars and talk about the things that happened.
There's VFWs everywhere, I mean, you know. So.
It can
Especially
cement, I think, a collective identity for the survivors and for their children, right? We just think about 9/11. I mean, that was very, very close to us because we lived so close to it, and we all lost people. And is it healthy to keep remembering that? Or is it better we enshrine past pains? I don't think there's any.
I don't know if
I don't think I do.
I think that there's a difference in, for me, Memorial Day was always a big thing in my hometown. There were so many people who had been in World War II. The American Legion was a very strong
We're a different
body
age,
in
that's
our,
why.
in
Yeah.
our community. But it wasn't about dwelling on the past. It was about honoring the people who had served, and it was a day of celebration and parades to honor them, not to dwell on the
Mhm.
terrible things that happened. In fact, I don't remember until after I was in college, even really realizing what was involved in the losses in
What
World
they
War
did.
II. I mean, we didn't really go into that in elementary school, even
Because
in high school.
the men didn't talk about it.
No, they did not.
And
No,
that
they don't.
changed. That really
With the
changed in
Vietnam
our
War.
society.
Yeah,
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm
that-
not sure that's a good thing, though.
I know, a lot of people agree with you.
I think you're better off to move on. I mean,
Well, I think maybe it's just not so much that the memory's there, it's how you deal with them. Every time someone passes away here, what do you have? A celebration of life. It's not a woe is me, somebody died.
mourning,
How
it'd
terrible
be
is
different
life.
if it was a 2-year-old.
It's a
But
celebration.
that's only been
Right.
in the last few years that it's been called a celebration.
Right,
Celebration
but
of
Before it was
it's
a
not
memorial
just here,
service.
it's
Right.
everywhere, it's a celebration of life, because it's much nicer. And we can choose slavery, okay, let's talk about slavery. Well, you can choose, well, we were slaves, we were brought over to America or wherever we were brought to, and was slaves of a terrible life. Or you can think,
Celebration of freedom.
look how far we've come, yes, there's still racism, but we had a black president, and, there are, things are improving, and you can look at it that way.
Look at
as
it the
well.
other way.
Yes,
How
it
about
was
this?
bad, but it's getting better.
You, just as that young African American today living in Venice says, yeah, that's my ancestry. What about you as a white person living in this area? How does that experience impact you? Do you feel that you bear that original sin?
Of
Slavery.
slavery? Not that, I don't really, but
How about you're both white, right?
most,
Only when I'm teen.
Yeah, it used to depend on my daughter, used to depend on what mood she was in. If she was Viva la raza, she would, I could be anything I want. Yeah, she could, yeah.
yeah, I
But-
identify as.
Yeah. Do you feel that you have been born as a white American with original sin?
sin doesn't come into my mind. That's kind of a negative thing. Whether there was sin or not, I just try to go forward and not do it.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't know.
I don't feel like I'm responsible for what happened in the past, but I think that it's my responsibility to recognize how things that happened in the past and are still happening,
like the Holocaust.
well, like the Holocaust, like slavery, like what we did to the Native Americans. That, you know, they're still living on reservations and
You're still
alcoholism
getting
and
money from the government.
or
More
my
than
paycheck.
any other group, and it's doing nothing. Those people are just
And
horrible.
so I feel like there's a responsibility to be aware and where I can to try to make a difference. That's what I feel.
So we kind of put
Well, you know-
slavery into the Amerindian experience, into the Holocaust. You know, these are human things, right? Not necessarily just American. I
Well,
don't
you
know
know
how
what?
we do it.
It's called guilt. And you get the politicians to play on your guilt. So we give free things to the poor, which is fine if they're really needed. But the people sometimes need some help to pull up their bootstraps and get going. But there are some people that sit back and expect someone else to take care of them. I'm sorry, too bad. I mean, after so many years, I say, I'm done. You know, I'm the first one to give someone help if they need it. But to keep giving my tax dollar to someone who has no intention of ever working.
Generationally, yeah.
I'm sorry, I mean,
Generationally.
like even the Indians, I don't feel sorry for them. They can do a lot of things. They're not dumb. I mean,
No.
they're pretty smart. But they're smart enough to let the government take care of them.
Well,
I don't agree with that, because I
No?
think it becomes a culture where you have no expectations to do any better. If all
Well,
you've ever
why?
experienced, because there's nothing where you're living to lift you up. There's no.
They
nothing-
haven't got public school systems they can go
no,
to.
they have res schools, and there's a lot of reasons why things aren't working on the
But if-
reservation system.
If they didn't have the money to do that, which the government gives them,
But
maybe they do it for themselves.
If people would hire them, people won't,
I
you
mean,
know,
I don't
sometimes
expect anyone to do, stuff for me that I can do.
Now,
I don't
in
understand.
Europe, in our lifetimes, I think, or very close to it, what do you think is the biggest traumatic event that happened, particularly in Germany?
Well, the Holocaust.
The Holocaust.
Yeah.
So it is still part of course, of the collective memory of Germans today, non-Jews. So I was listening to interviews with high school students and comparing them in Germany, what their concept of the Holocaust responsibility with what's happening here in the United States in terms of CRC, critical race theory and curricula. Like, what kind of responsibility do German high school kids take for the Holocaust as opposed to what some people think we should be teaching kids in Florida to take responsibility for slavery, American slavery?
I don't think that either one of them are responsible for it. The people before them were responsible for it. Don't pin it on me.
But we are doing that by saying you have to look at the founding fathers. They were all slaveholders. And
Well,
you're still
it's
living
good to
with their.
learn from the past, but you don't have to carry the burden of it.
I think what's interesting is the kids sound exactly like you. What those German teens were saying was, yes, that happened, and yes, it is a terrible black spot in our history, but can we please move on?
Yep.
Can we please move on? It's like 80 years, and
No one's ever gonna forget it.
we don't. I don't think we let kids say. I think it would be so politically incorrect if we had kids in our high school history class that, yes, there was slavery. it was there, get over it, let's move on, I think that would be
That would-
incendiary.
That would be a riot.
That would
waiting to
be
happen.
incendiary, and,
Get a life.
but you
Move
know,
forward.
it's just how we perceive and how we, well,
Well, you know, there's a lot of people in Germany too, like Bonhoeffer. I mean, there's a lot of people in Germany that were against Hitler
Oh
and
my
were
God,
against what was going on. And I mean, you can't blame every German. It's just like you can't blame every American for slavery or,
we can't blame the blacks for sure, but you can almost blame every white, even though most, I don't know what your
Right, we never
cultural
had
heritage
slaves.
is. But my families didn't come here during slavery, they were much later,
Yeah,
they
so
were,
my
My
family.
20th
family was
century,
in the
yeah.
1800s.
So, you know,
late-
that
late
means
1800s.
That my children and your children and your children, they have nothing to do with it.
what about, well, we're getting a
Yeah,
little
we're-
bit off.
we're-
Okay.
But
This is not Bible stuff, but.
this thinking is in the Bible, and it continues to have political ramifications. For example, groups have identified with the Israelites and their painful oppression at the hands of corrupt, unjust political regimes, and that is known as liberation theology, and it's alive and well. God brings the people justice. God hears them cry, and God responds to their pain. God fights for them, becomes a warrior, fights for their freedom, and accomplishes their liberation through violence. And does that sound right to you? Right?
No.
So you need to listen carefully when we read the book of Exodus. You have to listen to all the voices, because Exodus is still talking. And the book of Exodus is still providing a platform for freedom. It's still a fight for freedom. And it shows us that God has the power to deliver the people from the greatest power on earth, which at that time was Egypt. And then after God freed the people, God gave them land, the promised land. And yes, there were people already living on that land, right? But God removed them, and God made room for the newly liberated. God freed the landless peasants of Egypt and requisitioned the land of Canaan as the promised land for his people, the sons of Israel. And that is a synopsis that is very controversial for some, but it has a message. Now, before the Israelites went to Egypt, we know they were a small group, right? And they weren't powerful. 12 sons of Jacob and their families, but they had something that no one else had. They had a cherished promise, a covenant. And as they leave Egypt, then we learn that they have grown into this multitude, right? With a purpose and a message. And that message has become the basis for liberation theology. I don't know if you've heard of liberation. It combines religious and political ideology. And it has become a very strong 20th and 21st century. Started probably in the 60s in Latin America with priests living under that post-colonial system. Catholic priests actually used the Exodus as a basis for socio-political and economic reform in order to improve the lives of the poor who are landless and don't have a vote and they can't read and they can't go to school. And the movement is very controversial and some say very violent. Civil wars. Some say even worse. Now, there's another movement which is closer to home that we see came out of the book of Exodus. And Exodus, if you have black friends, they will tell you, especially their grandmothers, they'll tell you about their grandmothers that see Exodus as an important guide. I always remember hearing about Howard Thurman's grandmother will not read Paul. Hated Paul because Paul said, oh, just stay a slave, we're going to change the world sooner or, Jesus is coming back. But the Exodus, Moses is almost a Jesus figure in this community. Enslaved, abused by white Americans, still suffering from economic and cultural damages that were caused by slavery. And this movement is Black liberation theology. And talking about our first interracial president, Barack Obama, remember his very controversial minister? Where was he in? Was he in Chicago?
Mhm.
In Chicago. Jeremiah, what was his, I forget.
Yeah.
But, you know, not God bless America, God damn America, you know, and it was that whole getting out of bondage, getting to freedom. But the Exodus is a book of Torah, it's the Old Testament, and most Latin Americans are Christians, so they wouldn't be reading the Old Testament. And most African Americans, believe it or not, are Christians, and there's no Exodus in the New Testament, right?
No.
Aha. Well, say some scholars, the Old Testament Exodus story is all over the New Testament. And some commentators will even say that the life of Jesus Christ is nothing but a reenactment of Moses and Israel's experience in Exodus. And we're going to look at that closely.
He went to Egypt, right, to get away from the death, right? They were
Well,
gonna-
Jesus didn't, but Abraham did go to Egypt to get away from, did you say get away from the famine, the death?
No, from Jesus, what was it, Herod said, kill
Oh.
all the children.
Oh,
as a
Joseph.
child.
Oh, right.
They took
To
Egypt,
Egypt, yes.
they took Jesus to Egypt, right?
Yes.
To get him away from Israel. So he
Oh,
was-
oh,
Herod.
yeah, that is one of the
Children,
stories,
yeah.
absolutely.
So,
But, yeah, scholars said it never happened. It didn't
what are
happen,
we
yeah.
talking about here?
Very interesting. Luke, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Luke calls the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ an Exodus. And Matthew describes Jesus as the new Israel. He's just another Moses. And others say that our baptism is our exodus out of sin, out of that original sin that we talked about. So Exodus has become foundational for Jews and for Christians, and interestingly enough, for Muslims too. Have any of you ever read any of the Quran? It's like impossible. But I think it's difficult to read the Quran. It's not in any order. But in the Quran, the flight of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina is described as an exodus. And Moses is known as Musa in the Quran. And our Muslim friends that love Musa, he's the most frequently mentioned individual in the Quran, held in very high esteem. And there is no doubt that this book, The Exodus, that we're just starting, that we're just beginning, has had profound effects on just about all aspects of our world today, particularly religious studies. So,
Do you think it could be in effect with other religions, like Buddhist and Hindu and
yes,
how about
except for some religions, the Exodus is on that loop, right? You just keep trying. You get out and then you go back. You get out, that reincarnation idea.
how about Mormons?
Oh, very, very interesting. We're gonna talk about Mormons. I was always kind of uncomfortable to do that when Kate was here, because it can be tough. It can be very
Was
tough.
she a Mormon?
She attended a Mormon church.
Latter-day Saints.
And
Her son is also,
yeah,
her son's in Utah.
and we got a chance to, at Kate's memorial service, we got a chance to meet the bishop of the ward here nearby in Venice. And I invited him to come, and he graciously declined. He couldn't really, it's busy. And it's not a bishop like you think of Bishop Suarez. It's just a term that's used there. So, My question is, why are we still going over and over, repeating the same mistakes that we've been making since the Exodus? Why can't we just obey God the way we were told to obey God?
We have our own free will to obey him or not.
So you think that's what got the Israelites in so much trouble in Egypt? Free will?
I think that's what got humankind in trouble.
Well, and there comes a time when there's a lack of trust. I mean, rather than just trusting God, you decide to go your own way and try to fix it yourself. You wanna, just like in the Garden of Eden, you wanna be God and do it your own way, rather than trusting that he's got you covered, I guess, is sort of what I'm thinking.
Providence, I've been peeking into that for this Sunday's sermon. You know, can't you just trust?
Well, you know, it's funny, I go through, and I mentioned this to Pastor David, because something like this came up in Bible study. And I said, you know, when I have a problem, I just put it in God's hands, I walk away. It's in his hands.
Take it to the cross in prayer.
And what can I do? You can worry about something if this is gonna happen. Well, it may happen, it may not, so you're worrying for nothing. I mean, it's gonna happen if it's gonna happen.
I give it to God a lot, and then I take it back, and then I give it to him and I take it back.
Well,
and I
there's-
give it to him and I take it back.
I used to be a worrier, and my first husband said to me, well, what good is that doing you? It's gonna be what it's gonna be. It may be bad, it may be good, but if it's good, you're worrying for nothing.
Well, you
So
know,
and I
I
know
just
that
stop
too.
worrying, and I just go to
And I
God
tell
and say,
myself
it's
that
in
as
me.
I'm
it's so interesting because you talked about trust, you know, trusting God. Well, here's how I trust God. I bring him my problems to his feet at the cross, and then just to make sure, I say, get your behind in here, sit down. I want you to hear more of this, so you don't understand, you know. And life goes on.
He
You
does.
did not get it. Do you not hear what I'm saying?
You don't even have to
What
tell him.
do
He
you hear
knows.
when I speak? You know, I just told him that the other day. What do you hear when I talk to you? And
He's got plans for you, and no matter what you do, it's gonna be his plan, not yours.
you know,
I mean, lots of times things work out, not the way I wanted them to, but they do work out.
you say thank you, you know, before you eat dinner, right? Thank you, God, for all our blessings. Yeah, like killing Michael. Yeah, moving my daughter 3,000. Thanks a lot.
Well, none of us are
Whose
gonna
idea
get out
was
of this
that?
alive. I mean, that's how I look
Yeah,
at it.
yeah.
I mean, I've lost 2 husbands, and of course I've lost all but my
Aw.
sister. But it's not a big deal. That's what, why are you feeling sorry for me?
Well, you know, it's
Maybe God needed them more than I did, so he called them to heaven. It's not.
You know, that was one of the things we were told, never ever say to a family with a dying member, you know, God will never give you anything you can't handle. That's baloney.
Yeah.
Never say that. And God needs him more than you need him. What are some of the other things they told us not to say? Because we probably heard
But
them
that's
all.
how I
so-
think. I might not say it, but
Right.
that's how I think.
Well,
I mean,
there,
it's
things
just-
happen for a reason, and I just remember, your ways are not my ways. But if you listen to me, things could be a lot better. But you won't listen.
He
I know, we
knows.
have these conversations.
He knows before you know.
Oh, you're telling me.
And here you are arguing with him. You know, you remind me of, what's his name?
Oh, somebody very intelligent and attractive.
No, who was,
Oh,
who
God.
was it in Genesis that was always arguing with God? The first, I don't know which one it was.
Everybody argued with
I
him.
mean, he was always arguing with Abraham, always arguing with him. I mean,
Haggling, yeah.
you know, how can you argue with God? I mean, that's ridiculous.
That's what my Muslim
Doesn't
friend
make
would say.
sense.
How, because they absolutely refuse to believe that Abraham haggled. All right, will you kill the whole town if 10 people are good? Will you
Yeah,
kill the whole,
exactly.
you know, that whole thing. You don't talk to Allah that way, you know. You're not on
And yet you're
equal
doing
to-
it.
Yeah, oh, well, because my God is very personal to me, you know.
It's
We're like
personal
this.
to me too,
We're
but I
like
don't argue
this.
with him.
We're very close.
Well, he tells us to bring everything to him. So, including all of our questions and our doubts and our everything, so that's what I do.
Put those arms around me.
And then I know, and I know all those things you're saying, Priscilla, and I try to practice them, but then in the middle of the night,
You've been
they
doing
come
it
in
for
for-
too long. My first husband got me to stop doing that. And I
Does he have a
thought,
brother?
that makes sense.
Does he have a brother? I'll meet him.
Oh, they were all gone. I don't know what's with the Titanburg. They were, they
Oh,
were hardy
gosh.
people, but they all seemed to die of cancer. I made it through.
Well, let's go back to the family of Jacob, who, remember, Joseph was in that position of authority, with tremendous help to them, right? And got them all that good land in Goshen, and kept them in Pharaoh's good graces, and they were really doing well. And now all of a sudden, they're in deep, deep trouble. But it really isn't all of a sudden. The time between Jacob and what we're reading about now is about 400 years. That's how long it took them from going from the second family of Egypt, right, living the good life, to becoming despised and persecuted and enslaved
Already
people.
populated too much.
But doesn't it seem to happen to the Israelites more than any other group? Well, as you can imagine, lots and lots of writings that attempt to answer this question. Why us, Lord? Why are the Jews so often despised and hated so much that they have to be gotten rid of? Why them? So, the sages of the Midrash, which is the writings to try to explain what God is thinking, these rabbis writing over 1,000 years later, who were living under Roman rule. So it's persecution and discrimination for them too. We're talking about Jesus' time. These rabbis use this story of the Exodus to explain what the people are experiencing now under Roman domination. So slavery is a punishment for turning your back on God. That was a big one. That's what you'll read in Deuteronomy. And rabbis say the people wanted to become Egyptian. They tried to become Egyptian. They were not only physically enslaved, they were psychologically enslaved. And that's a big danger in some communities today. People who marry outside the faith assimilate. It's sure cultural and death for that community. So be sure to remember that they did not earn their freedom. They did not deserve their freedom. The Exodus is actually an example of God's grace. And I think that's the word it always comes down to, God's grace. They didn't do anything to earn that. They did practically everything to not deserve it. But that's what grace is. It's getting what we don't deserve. And mercy, not getting what we do deserve, right? Others say that the Exodus is just another example of God's plan, and that slavery is a teachable moment in time. Try saying that out on the street.
You've got to stop and think about slavery too for a minute. They're living over in Africa, and certainly it's not.
Slavery was in
and
Africa too.
They brought them, yeah, and there's still slavery in the world, but they brought them over here. Yeah, they worked on a farm, but they had a good place to live.
No,
You usually
No.
had a little, maybe it was a little hut, but it was better than what they had over.
no. They
No?
had a life. They had a family. They had history. They had
families here.
future.
They had a culture.
Imagine being torn out of here and put there, and
How
nothing.
could somebody walk into your town and take a bunch of men or women or whatever,
Oh, there was
put them on a boat and take them?
there was complicity. Africans turned in Africans, and a lot of slavers were African who enslaved their fellow Africans, and a lot of them were Muslim, interestingly enough.
Jeez, I'll tell you.
And,
What webs
and
we weave.
we're not good to each other, and it doesn't matter what color we are, we can mess up, but I don't think we're trying so hard not to do that anymore, and that's a good thing. We're trying. But the idea that slavery, learning about slavery is a teachable period in time, learn about what it feels like to be a slave, and to never allow anyone else to feel that way, and teaching kids never to oppress others, but to stay sensitive to the feeling of others, especially those who are oppressed. And not just because of race, not just, we have a big problem with money, particularly in this area. Nobody can afford to live here. The people who work here can't live here, and then there are people who fall through the cracks. And we have homeless people living, and we were talking about that. And we don't tend to them. We don't stay sensitive.
How come there weren't people homeless back when I was a kid?
Oh,
A
there-
guy would
they
come to
were.
Oh my God,
There
they
were.
were, that Skid Row. I mean, where did you grow up? Did you grow up in a city?
Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't allowed to go there. You weren't allowed to go to those sections in the city. You
Wow.
didn't
That's
see
what
it.
hobos were.
State?
I
Where-
mean, there's
what
guys
state?
who were writing the
You had a
mails.
kid. I lived in
Yeah.
West
Were
Hartford,
homeless.
and I went to Hartford a lot.
Homeless.
My father had his business in the black section, and they all loved my father. I mean, they were very nice. I'd go in there, they couldn't have been nicer to me.
You're not kidding, because they know if they weren't, there
Well,
would
you
have
know,
been.
my mother went
I
to
can't
see,
even imagine.
my mother went to see Arthur Godfrey in a movie theater outside. He was signing autographs. She just wanted to see. So she takes me, I'm 3. She takes me to Hartford. Well, I lost track of my hand let go and I couldn't find her. And I started to cry. And this tall black lady lifted me up and she says, "What's the matter, honey?" I said, "My mommy's lost." Not me, my mommy. And she says, "I'm gonna hold you up high," and you point to her and I'll take you to her. And she held me up and I went like that and she took me to my mother. That's my first encounter of a black. So how can I dislike them? I mean, I have never found a black being a problem to me.
Do you have a lot of black friends?
West Hartford didn't have, well, we had one black girl in high school. I felt so sorry for her. I went out of my way to talk to her and say hi and, you know, if we passed on the staircase or something. She was the only black girl, and I had 400 in my graduating class, and it was the 3-year, you know.
Right,
It was
right,
10,
high
11,
school.
and 12. And she evidently did all right. She had friends.
But there was a black high school nearby?
No, you'd have to go to Hartford,
Right,
and you'd have to go to the North End.
right,
The
but,
South
because
End
we
was
were
all
segregated
Italian.
then, right, segregated. We're segregated now,
Well,
money-wise,
what-
economically.
Where is the black church?
Sarasota.
You're asking me? Oh.
Anyone, is there a black church that's
Oh, yeah,
predominantly
In
Anita,
Sarasota,
descended by
Anita
black
Williams.
people here in Venice?
Oh.
Cause there is no place in America more segregated than a church on
Then the
Sunday.
church, yeah, Eric Holden.
How many black people attend this, or Manuel?
Well, we had one gal,
One. Out of
when
how many?
Pastor Sarah
You
was
said
here.
there's 700
But you
members
know
of
what?
Manuel.
She was there to criticize. And she was there, she was on a mission for something. I'm not sure she found it, because our church has always been friendly to everyone.
Church is usually a reflection of the community. So we don't have a lot of young people, and we don't have a lot of black people, and we don't have a lot of Asian people, because we don't live around a lot of
That's
black
true.
people, Asian people.
Right.
Different reasons why we don't have a lot of young people, but chances are, the people who live around the church are the people who are going to mostly come to the church. Sarasota has a thriving old black church that's been in existence.
I have a bunch of my customers at my storage facility, the black, probably maybe 10-20% are black, but, and they're all churchgoers, I know they are, we talk about it. Yeah, you know, so it's not a very, there's plenty of race down here in this area.
Oh, right, Just not, but not in Venice,
yeah.
not in
But,
Venice and Sarasota, definitely.
So it's interesting with, the black people often are very, very churched.
But they also like to be with their own.
Well, who knows?
I mean,
And
that's
who
part
knows
of
what
it.
their own is anymore, and I
We
remember.
have some in our neighborhood, in Village Walk, we have some black people. One of the gals and I, we put dances on and parties and things. Marge was great, she really was, and her husband was a sweetheart. I mean, they were just
When,
nice people, they didn't have any problem.
When my church in Frederick was going through a big old turbulent time with the pastor that they brought on, a real troublesome time, Brenda and I at the time, we were gonna try other churches, other Methodist churches in the area. So we
Oh.
attended
Different
we went to
Methodists.
one of the Methodist churches, it turned out to be the Black Methodist Church.
That's
We
right.
didn't know that, but,
There's one in Sarasota.
when we actually showed up, and never have I been to such a welcoming congregation. But I mean, and it was a Methodist church, but it was what do they call it?
AME?
AME, yeah, American
But we have one in
African
Sarasota.
Methodist. But talk about the
American
difference of
Methodist
white and gay.
Episcopal, right?
Literally, yeah. They that church was
That's the call
electrified.
sermon.
Let's just say that
Yeah.
they were the dancing and the music and everything. They were all up.
But
Everybody got up and
they have been, if you read womanist literature, that particular church has been accused of being so anti-woman and so patriarchal. You don't see female pastors, and you don't